Truly extraordinary men, Jerry Shestack and Tom Buergenthal. Jerry we like to think of as a friend of the GW Law family, but you'll forgive me if I say that Tom is a member of the family. But we're delighted to have both of you, although I will note that of the two of them, only one is wearing a proper GW color tie to which I say thank you and get on it, will you? I'm also delighted, in addition to welcoming all of you, in particular to welcome two deaconal colleagues today, Harold Poe from the Yale Law School, my dean, of whom you will hear, about whom and from whom you will hear more shortly, and Ricky Reviz from the New York University School of Law. I'm delighted to have both of you with us in my home today. So with no further ado, I will welcome the woman I had the honor of referring to last night at our dinner as the maker of the feast. Pat, you will tell Peter that he is very much in our thoughts and our prayers for a full recovery today, but I'm delighted to turn the podium over to you, and on behalf of all here, to thank you and the Foundation for all that you have done to advance the cause of justice.
Thank you, Dean Lawrence, for those very warm and welcoming remarks and for your hosting us here today. I'm Patricia Gruber, the president of the Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation, and we want to welcome you today to the 8th Annual Justice Prize. The Justice Prize honors individuals who have advanced the cause of justice through the legal system. We are delighted to be here at George Washington University, and we don't feel we could have chosen a more prestigious place to present this prize. We are here today to honor the achievements of Thomas Buergenthal and Jerome Shestack, two outstanding human rights advocates who were pioneers in the continuing fight for justice and human rights throughout the world. Before saying more about their achievements, let me tell you a little bit about the company they are keeping. The Foundation's prize program, which was established in the year 2000, now presents 5 annual $500,000 prizes in cosmology, in genetics, in neuroscience, in justice, and women's rights. Each prize recognizes achievements and discoveries that produce fundamental shifts in human knowledge and culture. On July 13th, the Genetics Prize was presented to Alan Spradling at the International Congress of Genetics in Berlin, Germany. On September 17th, at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, the Cosmology Prize was presented to J. Richard Bond. The Women's Rights Prize will be presented at Columbia University on November the 11th to Yanar Mohammed, Sapana Pradhan-Mala, and Nadera Shalhoub-Kevorkian. And on the 16th of November, the Society for Neuroscience meeting in Washington, D.C., we will honor John O'Keefe, where he will receive the Neuroscience Prize. Although my husband, Peter, cannot be physically here with us today due to a fractured collarbone, he's here in spirit, and I would like to pay tribute to his contribution of vision and leadership in establishing these prizes. So we have a little moment of thank you, Peter. And now back to the Justice Prize. Our laureates from the Justice Prize last year were Carmen Argibay, Carlos Cerda, and Monica Feria. Aharon Barak, Param Kumaraswamy, Arthur Chaskelson and Pius Longa, Rosalie Silberman Abella and Bertha Wilson, Bali Sam Nariman, and the inaugural laureates, Anthony Roy Gubby and the Law Society of Zimbabwe. The 2008 prize recipients were selected by our distinguished advisory board, comprising Dennis Archer, Giuseppe Visconti, Arthur Chaskelson, Param Kumaraswamy, Bernice Donald, and Martin Lee. And we are very happy that everyone, except those from Malaysia and Hong Kong, are here with us today to celebrate. Peter and I deeply appreciate the knowledge, the commitment, and the enthusiasm that the advisors bring to the judging process. This confers integrity on this prize. I'd like to thank the George Washington Law School for hosting the Gruber Prize this year. And Dean Lawrence and Morrison have done everything in their power to make this event a success. Now I'd like to present Dean Richard Rivez, a friend to the Justice Prize and the Women's Rights Prize, a strong advocate for human rights in his own right, Dean of the New York University School of Law, who will begin by reading the prize citation and then make brief remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. It's my honor to read the official citation for the 2008 Justice Prize. It reads as follows. The Peter and Patricia Gruber Foundation proudly presents a 2008 Justice Prize to Jerome Shestack and Thomas Buergenthal, two human rights advocates who are pioneers in the fight for justice and human rights throughout the world. They have demonstrated an unwavering commitment to creating a world in which both governments and citizens protect and honor individualized freedom and human dignity, while vigilantly fighting against social injustice and human rights abuses. Amid great challenges, Thomas Buergenthal and Jerome Shestack made tremendous and lasting contributions to creating a just rule of law and changing the landscape of human rights advocacy. Throughout their staunch advocacy, they influenced the thinking of government officials, policymakers, educational institutions, and the general public around the world, and brought these figures into the struggle for human rights. I'm very proud of Tom Buergenthal. He's one of our most distinguished alums at NYU Law School. He's a class of 1960 graduate. And Tom's story is one of the most amazing stories that I've encountered in my time as dean. And actually, our magazine, the law school magazine last year, did a long profile of Tom, which showed how he came out of the horrors of the Holocaust, having spent his childhood in concentration camps, to come out with the determination, the passion, and the optimism, his most incredible optimism, that the world could be a better place and that he would make it a better place, and he has, and at NYU Law School and everywhere else. We're very proud of you, Tom. Jerry Shestack is not an alum of NYU Law School. That is very unfortunate. We wish he was. But Jerry has had an amazing career, and the thing I've been most impressed is how he took an institution, the ABA, and the presidency of the ABA, which is an exalted position, but not always one that can be used to push forward an affirmative mission. There are hundreds of thousands of lawyers, there are hundreds of committees, there's a very complicated governance process, and you can sort of imagine how this could slow down action that seeks to change things. And Jerry succeeded in ways that almost no one ever does, and it's a tremendous accomplishment. Congratulations to both of you. It's a great honor to be part of this wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Dean Rivez. We're now going to show a brief video tribute to our two recipients, highlighting two men of stature with a passion for justice and a commitment to the belief that human rights and dignity will win out over contrary forces.
I walked up to the police captain, the German, when they were taking all the children away. And I was 9 years old. And I said to him, Herr Hauptmann, ich kann arbeiten, Captain, I can work. And he looked at me and he said, das wollen wir mal sehen, let's see. And he got me there. Don't wonder, he was this killer. They were executing all the children and all people. And he's looking at me. What went through his mind? Why me?
My grandfather had a great deal of influence over me. He taught me Bible, and he taught me the Bible not only in terms of its literal meanings, but in terms of the moral lessons in the Bible. And one of the verses that was his favorite verse, and that he thought most important, for civilization, or the lines in Leviticus, justice, justice, shalt thou pursue.
At San Francisco, the United Nations Conference on World Security Organization moves ahead.
And I spent the day at the opening of the UN conference. It was a seminal event in my life. I never forgot it. And later, when I became U.S. ambassador to the Commission on Human Rights, I remember it had been begun on that day in April 1945. If you live in this world, you've got to have faith that eventually you're going to prevail, and that eventually human rights and dignity are going to win out.
To me, it's very important that those of us who've survived can tell their own story, because that really tells the terrible tragedy it was, not only for those who survived, but even more so for those who died in the camps. Otherwise, the whole thing will just be forgotten. Okay. Becoming an international lawyer is obviously related to my own experiences. I realized that this was really the profession in which I, as an individual, could contribute more than other people. I could feel in my bones what it was like to be a victim of human rights violation. Sometimes you feel like despair, because after each event we say never again, and then of course it is again.
We still have a dream of a just world and a hope that it will come to pass. Each age is a new age and one with new opportunity. And if you don't remain optimistic and hopeful and work for those ends, you might as well not have lived.
I'd now like to ask Thomas Buergenthal and Jerome Shestack to come forward to receive the prize. Our recipients will now make brief remarks. Judge Buergenthal, would you like to begin?
Thank you very much. Let me first express my deeply felt thanks to the Grubers, to Peter Gruber, who unfortunately, as you already heard, cannot be here today, and to you, Patricia, and to the foundation you've established, which reflects your strong commitment to the advancement of the humanitarian values for which you stand. We should really be honoring you here, you and Peter here today, for the creative and highly effective manner in which you have over the years promoted many causes and activities that contribute to making ours a better world. I salute both of you with admiration and wish Peter that he should recover soon and join in the fight, the good fight that he's been fighting. I am, of course, profoundly honored to have been deemed worthy of this very special prize and to be sharing it with Jerry Shestack, an old friend and great human rights leader who was always the person I admired for all the work that he was doing before I even was old enough to do it. I know that there are many men and women in the US and abroad who deserve this prize much more than I do. Individuals who daily risk their careers and their lives fighting for human rights. my human rights work has been inspired by the courage of these individuals and by the suffering of the victims of the Holocaust. It's in their name that I accept this prize with profound gratitude to the Gruber Foundation. Of course, I'm also very pleased that this ceremony is taking place here at George Washington Law School, my academic home, whose faculty and students have always made me feel at home, made me feel that I belong. Thank you, Dean Lawrence, for your kind words and for your inspired leadership of the school that I have come to love. It's good to be back among so many old friends. My special thanks to Dean Revish for your moving words. You have transformed my alma mater with your humanity, intellectual honesty, sense of history, and commitment to the highest professional standards. You've made me truly proud to be an alum of NYU Law School. Let me note finally that for a 17-year-old who came to America with $50 hidden in his shoe, I still don't know why my mother thought that was important. But it came with me. Today's check proves that the streets of America are truly paved with joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Shestack, and I approve of this message. I'd like to congratulate Pat Gruber because I understand it's his 80th birthday, and if he could, he would be here. He and both Pat are a believer in repairing the world in good causes, and the foundation they have set up reflects that commitment on their part. So thank you both. I'd like to just say how glad I am that my family is here. They don't often get the chance to hear good things about me. And not only that, but they gave up watching the Phillies game last night in order for my two sisters, Louise and Judy Feldman, the Brow, my brother-in-law, and my daughter Jennifer and her husband Jeff and my son Jonathan to be here. So I'm very happy about that. And I'm particularly happy to share this award with Tom Buergenthal. Tom has been a hero of mine. His nursery was Treblinka. His kindergarten was a crematorium. His grade school was Auschwitz. And he emerged from that with a determination to fight for human right and dignity, to make the law better in our time, and to provide an inspiration for so many of us as he has. And so I congratulate Tom Buergenthal for that award so justly deserved. I'd like to also thank the selection committee. There's a terrific selection committee we have. Arthur Shackleton, who had been the Chief Justice of the highest court in South Africa at a trying time in that nation's history. Bernice Donald, who's been a pioneer in fighting discrimination and human rights within the American bar and elsewhere. Giuseppe Visconti, who had headed the International Bar Association and has traveled all over the world in missions on behalf of human rights. And Dennis Archer was also on the selection committee. I really think he shouldn't be on the selection committee. I think he should be on the Supreme Court of the United States. And a prior winner of this award, Rosie Abella. Rosie Abella is not only where is Rosie? Rosie Abella. She is my ideal of not only what a justice of the Supreme Court of Canada or any Supreme Court should be, but as a human being with her compassion, her integrity, her inspirational qualities, her charm, her intelligence. I'm a great fan of Rosie Abella, as you know. In my own case, I think you saw in that video the words of my grandfather, "Justice, justice shall thou pursue," the words in the book of Deuteronomy. And that resonated with me. And another lesson that he told me, which is you're obliged to try and repair the world. Repair the world. It's a simple term. But there's so much to repair. And when you get around to doing it, you find that not only is it important what you do, and not only does it help advance and do repair the world, but it brings you joy in doing it. There's a line from the poet Tagore, "I dreamt of duty and I woke, I dreamt of joy and I woke to duty. I performed and behold, duty was joy." So working on these causes to advance justice and human rights has not only been something that I thought was useful, worthwhile, but has brought joy and fulfillment in my own life. But I also realized that advances in this field are slow and incremental, and sometimes one loses patience. There's another poet who once said, Wallace Stevens, "I cannot make the world quite round, I patch it out as I can." So I go on and I try to patch it as I can and continue to have hope. Quote still one more poet. Seamus Haney said, "History says don't rely on hope. It's something that is beyond the grave. But once in a lifetime, the flow of justice will rear up and history and hope will rhyme." And I still have hope that we can repair the potholes of misery around the world, that we can make the rule of law a reality in our time, and that we can raise human worth and dignity for all men and women and for all in time and eternity. Thank you very much.
It's wonderful to be among so many distinguished individuals, and it is now my great pleasure and an honor to present our distinguished featured speaker, Dean Harold Coe, the Gerard C. and Bernice Latrobe Smith Professor of International Law at Yale. He's a leading expert on international law and a prominent advocate of human and civil rights, for which he has received much recognition and numerous prizes. He's been a member of the Yale Law School faculty since 1985 and its dean since 2004. From 1998 to 2001, Dean Coe served as Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Before joining Yale, he practiced law at Covington and Burling and at the Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice. You must realize that this is a very abbreviated introduction. When we looked up all of the things that could be said about Dean Coe, it would have taken me much, much longer to do him justice. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome Dean Coe.
Let me get the technical arrangements set here for a second. Let me say first, what an extraordinary honor it is to be here with these two gentlemen who I admire so much. I'm sure you're wondering, how important an event is this? I'll give you this rule of thumb. If it's a very distinguished person, they're introduced by one dean. If they're really great, they're introduced by two deans. But when they are extraordinary beyond measure, it takes three deans. And I'm particularly delighted because both Fred and Ricky are friends of mine, also especially delighted because they're both graduates of Yale Law School. The inimitable Guido Calabresi, previous dean, said to me, "It is always a joy when a graduate of our school becomes a dean, because then you can take credit for all of the accomplishments of that dean at their school. It's not what we call incorporation by reference. Now, for me, it's a particularly touching moment to be back here at GW Law School, because as was not, doesn't maybe leap out, is that this is the school with which I have had the closest connection other than with Yale Law School. It is the school that gave me my first teaching job. I have taught here at the night program for 3 years at the beginning of my career. I courted my wife, who is a graduate and faculty member of GW, more than 25 years ago, and we're celebrating our anniversary. I parked over there, which is still a parking lot. I taught with my dear friends Ralph Steinhardt and Susan Karamanian in the Human Rights program at Oxford, and now, of course, Fred is the dean. And also in this room, I should just acknowledge the presence of mentors like Peter Truboff, who has helped me through my career starting at Covington and Burling, colleagues from the State Department like Catherine Brown and David Stewart, John Bellinger, with whom I work, former students like Ed Swain, Betsy Anderson, who are now distinguished, Tara Mellish, distinguished human rights practitioners in their own right. Steve Charnovitz, too, I see you, Steve. So this is a great opportunity for me to say thank you for teaching me about the joys of a career in human rights and in teaching. Now, when I was thinking about this program, I was speaking to our beloved friend Rosie Abella, previous winner. She is, as you may know, an aficionado of animated cartoons. And she referred to it as the Tom and Jerry show, which as a young Korean boy growing up in America was one of my favorite cartoons. Now, as you may, I never remember which one was the mouse and which was the cat, but the energy that surrounded them, the interactivity, shall we say, of these two individuals combined with what I would call a happy warrior style, which characterizes great human rights practitioners, Nelson Mandela, these individuals here. Happiness in the face of often extraordinarily discouraging situations has been a source of tremendous delight. Now, I thought I would tell you a little bit about the Tom and Jerry show and the world they made and where it's led, because it's so fitting that this award be given to a human rights professor judge, Tom Buergenthal. You see his many accomplishments here, and you've heard about them in the video and in the program, and a human rights lawyer, Jerry Shestack, who as president of the ABA, as UN ambassador to the Human Rights Commission, commissioner of the U.S. Presidential Congressional Commission to improve the effectiveness of the UN, a counselor at the American Society of International Law. These two individuals have had extraordinary lifetimes in human rights, and working together, although often in parallel, they help to build the human rights environment in which we live. And that environment, I think, can be thought of, and this is the 60th year of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as falling into basically 4 eras. The first, an era of what could be called the universalization of human rights norms that ran into the middle of the Cold War. The second, a period of institutionalization of human rights values into government and non-governmental organizations. An era of operationalization, when institutions and norms started to work together to create an engine for human rights change. And then the era in which we now begin, the era of globalization. It started with the fall of the Berlin Wall and has gone through sub-eras. At the beginning, a period of global optimism in which the possibilities of globalization excited all of us, the internet, international travel, the network nature of our society. And then September 11th, when a second structure fell, not the Berlin Wall, but the Twin Towers. And then suddenly we were plunged into a period of pessimism. All of the tools of globalization were suddenly seen to be threatening. The internet as a way in which terrorists can cooperate, the airlines, now weapons, all of these, the financial interactivity of the system, something that could lead to financing of terrorist activity, which brings us to what I call the post-Cold War period, which happily is about to begin. Next Tuesday is when it's going to begin. Now, to bring you to the present, let me just identify the role played by our two honorees in each of these eras. At the beginning, where the focus was universal norms, the paradigm violation genocide, it was the Four Freedoms speech of Franklin Roosevelt, the treaties that followed from it, Dumbarton Oaks and the creation of the UN Charter, recognizing that the world order is to protect human rights, the building of international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, the Refugee Convention, the first starting of a system of international adjudication of the kind in which Tom Buergenthal has participated with trials at Nuremberg and Tokyo, the creation of the International Court of Justice, the identification of certain kinds of offenses as crimes against humanity, and then the vertical link between the international and the domestic. The second wave of democracy that came after World War II and that brought democracy to countries such as Germany and Japan and other parts of Western Europe. This was the period in which, as you heard, Jerry and Tom got their start, where they found their passion, where in surviving and getting inspiration from their own family members, they found the passion that would lead them through their lifetimes. And this led in the 50s to the creation of human rights institutions that might actually implement these norms. The Economic and Social Council at the UN Human Rights Commission, where Jerry was our ambassador, the UN Human Rights Committee, of which Tom Buergenthal was the first U.S. representative, the treaty bodies, about which Tom wrote with Louis Sohn, the Helsinki process and the Strasbourg process, where both of them were involved in helping to create a human rights system for Central and Eastern Europe. The Inter-American system, where Tom was the Costa Rican judge, because of course we are not a party to the American Convention, but the Costa Ricans decided that there could be no better message than to put Tom Buergenthal on. And then the NGO community, which has the Human Rights First, one example, an organization which was partly founded by Jerry Shestack. Institutions, governmental and non-governmental, that can give these norms force. And then, in the period leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall, the machine starts to operate. Implementation by working groups and special rapporteurs, the creation of regional systems, the development of national systems and national adjudication, the dramatic rise of NGO activity, which led us to the period in which I was lucky to serve in government, the immediate post-Berlin Wall period, where we were flushed with excitement about the globalization of freedom in various parts of the world, the revival of international criminal adjudication leading to the signing of the Rome Treaty of the International Criminal Court, the expansion of regional systems and entities like NATO to address ethnic conflict, the Vienna Conference on Human Rights, which created a UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the revival of US human rights policy in various areas, although with some significant failures, which I describe as but-see. Which leads us to today, the dawn of this post-Cold War world. And here we now are living the 21st century in an age of globalization, what Tom Friedman characterizes as hot, flat, and crowded, an interdependent world where the nation state has declining power, where there's growing network power, where global problems proliferate. And think of them: the economy, disease, terrorism, trafficking in human beings, and institutions which are globalizing but incompletely globalized, rights which are globalizing but incompletely globalized, governance structures, governmental and non-governmental, which are globalizing but incompletely. Which led to the foreign policy vision that our country had as of September 11th. It was, with some exceptions, but exceptions that proved the rule based on 4 simple ideas. Universal human rights based on the 4 freedoms of speech. Democracy promotion from the bottom up. A diplomatic approach based on strategic multilateralism and unilateralism only as a last resort. International law and institutions, and promoting global cooperation among global democracies to solve global problems. About a week before I left the State Department, I was asked to brief the incoming Secretary of State, Colin Powell, on the democracy and human rights policy of the United States, and I was given 30 seconds to do so. That's deliberation in government. And I said to him, Mr. Secretary, and there were 2 maps, one of the world in 1970 with about 30 democracies, another map in 2000 with about 120, and I said, Mr. Secretary, you see the pattern of history that the democracies are the ones which are solutions, the dictatorships are the ones that are problems. The major change between the last 30 years is so many more opportunities to cooperate with other global democracies, but the other change, so many global problems. And so our strategy must be to use global cooperation among global democracy to solve global problems, such as financial crisis, environmental injury, health problems, democracy building, and terrorism. Now, I believe that. I still believe that. I think Colin Powell believed it. But as you saw, a 4th and final piece, I think a piece which the 2 gentlemen behind me deeply shared, is a belief that in important respects, the United States is part of an interdependent world, and international law is in important respects part of our law. So these 4 values were ones that Jerry Shestack and Tom Buergenthal not only believed, they lived for these values, they lived these values. And today we live in a world that has been turned upside down. Universalism has been rejected in favor of double standards. Freedom from fear has been put forward as an overriding value. Democracy building has been done from the top down through often claims of a right to preemptive strikes. Diplomatic, an approach based on strategic unilateralism with the attendant antipathy to international law and indifference to global cooperation, and strangely, to my mind, an academic and legal effort to exclude international law from domestic law and to treat an illegitimate response to the war on terror as lawfare. And I think there have been 4 tragedies. We know them well, but it's worth reviewing them. Take Abu Ghraib, which I think really ripped the scab off the war on terror. In 2000, I testified before the Torture Committee that the United States is unalterably committed to a world without torture. As many of my colleagues who are here from the State Department knew, that was not a controversial statement. My statement had been cleared with every available government agency. We said there is no circumstance under which we ever deem torture to be an appropriate use of state power. And we have gone from 0 tolerance to 0 accountability. Some low-level prosecutions, multiple military investigations have produced close to no punishment, a grotesque effort to define torture out of practice, use of euphemisms, and increasingly an attempt to persuade the public that somehow torture is inevitable and justified as a tool regularly used in a war on terror. And part of that has been a popularization of torture, so that a popular television show, which I watch, 4 torture scenes a year before 9/11, now close to 100 a year, most of those involving U.S. officials committing war crimes, depicted as justifiably committing those crimes as instruments of state policy. And whatever you might think, these are messages that are being sent to the parts of the world that we are trying to persuade that we are right. And Guantanamo, we are all sick of it, tired of hearing of it. The costs are stunning. More suicides than pending cases. Virtually no convictions. The number of detainees down, very few considered high value. The costs in the millions at the time of an incredible economic crisis. hundreds of habeas petitions filed, an extraordinary list of individuals who say it should be closed. The President, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, 8 Democratic candidates, 2 Republicans, all of our major allies. And yet, a few days ago, the statement that Guantanamo will stay open to be a problem for the next administration. And then I think the scapegoating of international law, this claim of lawfare. Jack Goldsmith, my student, is a very admirable person who has stood up for the rule of law in this administration, well chronicled in this book, The Terror Presidency, his refusal to issue an legal opinion, his withdrawal of the torture opinion. But look at this philosophy from one of our most committed rule of law people. The commander-in-chief ensnared by law. You know, I thought the commander-in-chief was a creature of law. I thought that law was what creates the commander-in-chief, and therefore the constraints on the commander-in-chief, like checks and balances, are actually part of what a commander-in-chief is. And then the idea that somehow globalization and a more conservative Supreme Court have motivated many in the academic American left to replace our Constitution, heavens, with the international human rights as a font of progressivism. And so, what I have described as this network, nations, NGOs, academics, international organizations, international community, weaving a web of international law and judicial institutions that threatens U.S. governmental interests. And unless we tackle this problem head on, it will continue to grow. Law is the problem and not the solution under this vision. Now, the impact on our global reputation, you all know. Favorable opinions of our country have fallen everywhere, particularly sharp in our most important allies. Take these charts, developed a number of years ago. In Germany, 85% of the people thought that Guantanamo was illegal, 65% in the UK. Here, in 1998, 61% of Germans thought we were doing a good job on human rights. Now, 78% think we're doing a bad job. So in this post-Cold War world, what should the new president do? And let me make 2 very simple points. First, as exhausted as people are, and as exhausted as the next president will be after the most grueling and lengthy presidential campaign, the next 8 years are so much more important than the last 8 because they will determine whether the pendulum pushed so far can be brought back rapidly or whether we'll stay stuck in the direction it has been, thus creating a new normal. Second, I think we have to recognize that there are so many problems that it cannot simply be that they are all subsumed by a policy based on the war on terror. So starting as early as next week, but perhaps on January 2009, what should be done? And I would suggest 4 simple steps: putting our house in order, closing Guantanamo, issuing executive orders, introducing national security legislation, respecting international law and institutions. Closing Guantanamo requires a concerted intergovernmental effort among different agencies to determine which of the detainees should be prosecuted, which extradited, which repatriated, which resettled. I think a special envoy could be appointed by next week. And remember the 2 precedents. One, the Iranian hostages crisis, in which a coordinated effort among 2 agencies led to the release of hostages on election day. And contrast it with the other example, the Clinton transition, which could not close Guantanamo, which led to them having to take ownership of that issue. The policy didn't change for 2 more years. And those were allowed to say that it was necessary as a feature of dealing with our refugee policy. Now, even the other day, I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I said something quite similar to this, and Senator Brownback from Kansas said to me, "Professor," this is not a term of respect down here, do you mean to say, he said, that these terrorists should be brought to America and to Kansas, Leavenworth, Kansas? I said, this is not part of my brief where they should be brought. However, Guantanamo clearly should be closed. Why are we not closing Guantanamo? Because of concerns about who will be brought in. And he persisted, and finally I said to him, Senator Timothy McVeigh killed thousands of people in Oklahoma. He was brought to a supermax prison in Colorado. He was given due process of law. He was punished. He posed no threat to either his fellow inmates or to his community. And on that basis, we do have the capacities here, which we have built up over the years to address problems like this. We do not need Guantanamo, and your concerns about Kansas can't be the only reason why it stays open. Which means, among other things, the Defense Department should begin to shut down the facility. The various offices should be asked to answer to those who have concerns and issues on human rights and humanitarian law. The Justice Department should appoint a point person to deal with habeas issues. And perhaps most important, lawyers should be empowered, as they have not been recently, to review secret opinions and withdraw those which are obsolete or contrary to American law. And I think that on the first day, second day of the new administration, an executive order can be issued which closes Guantanamo by date certain, makes clear that torture should not be done by any person employed or under contract to the U.S. government, clarify that the authorization of use of military force resolution does not authorize the invasion of human or civil rights, to establish a committee on national security law chaired by the Attorney General with regard to past abuses, to create the equivalent of a 9/11 Truth Commission that can recommend, investigate, and then recommend various kinds of accountability measures, and to make sure that other detainees under U.S. control are not moved to black sites in an effort to control habeas. Now, I know you're saying, well, this is an Obama agenda, but it is candidate McCain who said, waterboarding is not complicated, it's torture. It was used in the Spanish Inquisition, it was used in Pol Pot, it's used against Buddhist monks today. Or national security legislation. Maybe in this town we can have legislation. Maybe we can actually have a legislative process. Maybe at a time in which the Republican candidate is saying, oh, we lost it. The Republican candidate is saying, I'll finish it without the slide, that American officials will never torture again, meaning that they have tortured till now. Maybe we should actually ban torture. Now, notice that Professor Goldsmith in his book says that the current administration's failure is to be inattentive to credible expressions of public concern for constitutional and international values. This has been a major source of his soft power. And so I think that on the international front, and this is my fourth suggestion, we should re-engage with international law and institutions. Let's start with the International Criminal Court Treaty. There are some who have said to me, there are changes of nuance in the Bush administration with regard to the criminal court. I'd say, yeah, like a 180-degree change of nuance. At the beginning of the administration, they wanted to kill the court. Now, in fact, it's not a new administration. It's this administration has consented to the Darfur case. It's supported prosecutions in Congo and Uganda. It's supported a Sierra Leone tribunal to prosecute Charles Taylor, supported the prosecution of his son, supported a Cambodian tribunal, supported the Milosevic and Saddam prosecution. John Bellinger, who is here today, has said they accept the reality of the International Criminal Court. And my question then is, why isn't our policy now positive engagement with the court? Why is our policy controlled by the dead letter of John Bolton, who is long since gone from the government? And my question is, why can't we immediately shift on January 20th to a positive engagement strategy leading to a removal of the Bolton letter, a signing or reassertion of the signature of the Rome Treaty on December 2000, and moving to eliminate barriers to legislative and executive barriers to ratification of the treaty? Or in Sudan, again, there's a high degree of consensus on what ought to be done. The 4 Ps, a peace process, peacekeepers, protecting people, refugees, and the internally displaced, punishing of perpetrators through ICC accountability, sanctions, and blood oil revenues. Those can be done quite quickly. And just imagine this, that a new president by February 1st has announced, I am closing Guantanamo, I have an executive order banning torture, I'm introducing legislation to take these various steps, and I'm going to re-engage with the International Criminal Court what a signal that would send to the world. And I'll tell you something, when Barack Obama appeared in Berlin and hundreds of thousands of people appeared, they didn't appear because they thought he was going to continue the policies that have been going on for the last 8 years. And for the future, emphasizing democracy building in areas that have been ignored around the world, promoting private-public partnerships to stop blood resources, keeping the internet free, and other such things. Because we should remember that the war on terror is so much broader part of the foreign policy agenda. There are so many issues that need to be faced, not to mention, oh yes, the economy, energy prices, the cost of food and shelter and immigration. Well, you might say this is a fantasy, but look at what John McCain has said. We must pay decent respect to the opinions of mankind. We should fight the terrorists and defend the rights that are the foundations of our society. We cannot torture and treat inhumanely suspected terrorists. We must close Guantanamo and come to a common international understanding on the disposition of dangerous detainees. My view is his administration has a mandate to pursue these issues. Or candidate Obama, who speaks about dealing with HIV/AIDS, bringing an end to genocide in Darfur, maintaining the highest standards of human rights and civil liberties, close Guantanamo, restore Hugo, say no to torture. And he says if you are ready for change, you can elect a president who so believes. All these things are possible, he says, if you're ready for change. So what I suggest in closing that we can expect is a tale of three globalizations. The globalization of governance, the globalization of freedom, and increasingly the globalization of fear. And one thing the president can say, the new president, whoever he is we have nothing to fear but fear itself. But the fear is part of the globalization, the global spread of terrorism, the global spread of economic instability, the global energy crisis, the global food and housing crisis, the spread of disease. We need global solutions. We need global cooperation among global democracies to combat the globalization of fear. And let me conclude by suggesting that this is not something we should leave to political actors. It's a challenge for all of us. And I think the most important thing, it is something we must do because ours is a nation built on human rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. It's to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, that we have a Constitution of the United States of America. If our country loses its close identification with human rights, we have lost the thing that defines us as a nation and as a people. That's something that Tom and Jerry never forgot. And so the question, after these dark years in the post-Cold War world, can we restore the world that Tom and Jerry tried to build? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Sloat. We are just about on time right now. We're going to be running over just a few minutes. We will hear a few remarks from our two recipients. And if anyone in the audience has questions, we have passed cards around. So you may write your questions on the cards, and we will take a few minutes to hear answers to those questions. If you need a card, please raise your hand. We do have an extra card. Jerry Shestack, would you like to begin your remarks?
Well, I'd like Tom Burke to begin.
All right.
I was hoping Jerry would. But, well, let me say first of all that for me it is a great honor to be here together with Harold Coe. When he was Assistant Secretary for Human Rights, one had the sense and conviction that that there was somebody in the U.S. government who really believed in that job and in what could be done. And I remember meeting you in different parts of the world when you were performing that function. And it was, for me, to see you and hear you and see what you were doing filled me with great pride and gave me hope. So I'd like to pay homage to you for the work that you did as Assistant Secretary, and I wish it could have been much longer. Now, after you hear Harold, what is there to say? You've covered everything. I have the great advantage as a sitting judge. I can always say I really can't comment on any of the things that, and I would really like to do that after he covered about everything that could be said. There are a few things. I don't want to get into the internal American aspect of the problem. But for one thing, as an American judge sitting on an international court in a foreign country, you meet two conflicting things. On the one hand, there is tremendous goodwill towards the United States, and now tremendous expectation in what can be done and what the future will bring. So I'm hopeful that whoever is president, that the values that used to guide American foreign policy in the past will again have the impact that they had in the past, when the United States, in fact, was responsible for creating the international, in many ways, the international human rights system. We've neglected it in the past, in recent past. But I think it is possible to reestablish that. And I must say, I've been afraid to go back to Latin America, where I used to promote human rights and was received. I was afraid to go back now because I thought they would just laugh me or whistle me right off the stage. I think it won't take very long to reestablish that. There is in the world, and we sometimes forget that, there is a universal yearning for human rights in the world. You see that all over. We somehow don't have this feeling for what it means in many countries. They actually believe that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an important instrument that gives them rights. We don't believe that. As lawyers, we look at it, we say it's a non-binding instrument. But human beings who need human rights believe that this instrument has given them rights, and given them rights against their governments, and that governments have the obligation to comply with these rights. And as a result, what has happened in the world, and we've missed that, I think, is that in many parts of the world, you get the sense of people that when their government engages in large-scale violations of human rights, their people believe that the government is no longer a legitimate government. And governments begin to lose their legitimacy to govern because they violate human rights. And that is a development that has strengthened the struggle for human rights around the world. One final point. Harold mentioned the International Criminal Court. I think it is critical, the International Criminal Court. What is even more critical at this point is to strengthen its independence. There is pressure now being brought to prevent the indictment and trial of certain individuals. It's important for this tribunal, for this court, to have total independence, because it's wonderful, finally, for people around the world to be able to see heads of state sitting as criminals and being accused of violating human rights. It has a tremendous impact also on potential violators of human rights, to know that there is an international criminal court. Even the ad hoc tribunals are performing an important function in that sphere. As a matter of fact, I happen to believe that we need regional human rights criminal courts to try other things than what the International Criminal Court can try in all regions of the world. And we need more international regional human rights courts in Asia, sub-regional courts in Asia and in other parts of the world. We need to create many more institutions that actually apply international human rights law. The climate is there. People around the world are eager, and U.S. leadership in this field would be welcomed and could do tremendous things under people like Harold Coe when he was Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights.
I was told that I had 2 minutes to make comments. Giving a lawyer 2 minutes, especially a trial lawyer, is really a very funny line. But when Tom said that Dean Coe had said it all, that was correct. Now I can say Tom and Dean Coe had said it. You know, Harvard has a motto which is Veritas. Yale's motto is Veritas is lux. When I hear Dean Coe, he always gives the light in addition to the Veritas. I think one of the points that Dean Coe pointed out was that the United States has lost its moral authority. I never would have thought that the United States would be involved in torture at the highest levels, rendition, unwarranted surveillance, attacks on the independent judiciary, violation of checks and balance, misuse of signing statements, all of these things which have deteriorated from our own moral authority. It's very hard to go out and champion human rights around the world when they can say, take the beam out from your eye before you talk about the one in my eye. And that's a difficulty that hopefully in a week or so we will overcome. I think there is another area that needs developing. Governments have sovereign power, and we were thought for a while that governments lost their sovereign power. To some extent, they would lose their sovereign power by being subject to a rule of law that would be worldwide or universal in its approach. As it turns out, governments are very reluctant to give up their sovereign power. On the other hand, we have large industry, big businesses, part of globalization, that also have a tremendous power. And I think it's important that we hold these corporations to standards of equity for their employees, to standards of non-discrimination, to standards where they abide by human rights in the countries that they are in. How we do that, I'm not sure. But I think that you now have another power, which is the global corporation, that must be dealt with to restrain and to make them do the right thing, just as human rights and law tries to do that from government. The other encouraging thing that I find is the development of law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which Dean Coe mentioned 60 years ago, at the time that it started after the UN, it was a set of standards of achievements for the world. The first group of 11 are much like our own Bill of Rights. The next deal with things like right to education and right to health and right to welfare and right to social security. Those rights that make a person whole. You know, a slave who is hungry is still a slave who is hungry is a slave. But a slave who is not hungry is still a slave. And someone who is not hungry and someone who is hungry but is not a slave is really a slave. There has to be a well-being for the human being with respect to fighting poverty and those destructive elements of our environment that make a person whole and are really an element of human rights in today's world. Law is very important in achieving that. Law changes habits, brings about customs. Eventually, even law that's not followed has an influence. It gives dissenters a reed on which they can rely, on which they can talk about, on which they can use to stimulate their protests and their ambitions and their aspirations for human rights and for treating people the way they should be treated. So we're living in a world where there are pros and cons. You have some good that has arisen over the past years.
perhaps things are developing. The world is supposed to go in cycles, and perhaps the next cycle will be one where human rights and justice can prevail. I think it takes the efforts of a lot of people, NGOs, government, ordinary people. It's not just something that one can do in a solitary way. And again, when I'm all through, I'm left with hope.
We have some questions here. The promotion of human rights has expanded over the last few years to include a collective responsibility to protect populations from genocide, crimes against humanity, and ethnic cleansing. How optimistic are you about the implementation of this new concept? How can the U.S. advance this concept? Roberta Cohen.
Well, I see. Should I think the question in some ways relates also to the resolution that the UN adopted on this subject. That is the obligation to protect. I think in the future, this resolution, which is now sort of nobody seems to know much about it, is going to become another universal declaration of human rights. And with the adoption of this resolution, whether the UN knows it or not, it has in fact legitimated the right of the international community and the obligation of states to act when states commit genocide and ethnic cleansing and other gross violations of human rights. So I think this resolution, which will take quite a while to be implemented, and it will take a long time, is one that is going to lay the foundation for a very much more active international community involvement in the prevention of large-scale violations of human rights.
Well, I agree. The responsibility to protect seems to be something that's almost impossible with respect to a Security Council that has veto power and will prevent peacekeeping on a scale that it should be, or has prevented action in places like Darfur. Even the African community has prevented it. But it's a concept that needs developing, and sometimes these concepts get a life of their own after they're heard, and you see how they make common sense. What you're saying really is that you should anticipate situations of genocide and crimes against humanity and do something to prevent it in advance, not after 2 million people have been killed in Darfur to say, well, that's terrible and that's genocide and we ought to do something about it. It's too late at that point. So how you do that and still maintain the sovereignty of nations to which they're very devoted is a difficult concept. But it may come, and it's certainly worth trying to push. A lot of our concepts that we thought would never realize have become adopted, part of international law, part of customary law, and the right to protect ought to be one of them.
I would add only that the responsibility to protect will turn on whether the next administration acts on Darfur, and the conditions are there to act. But a critical point, the responsibility to protect must be exercised somewhere other than when white people are being the subject of genocide. Secondly, it also has to be accompanied by other steps. Accountability for past violations, cutting off blood oil, which is leading to future violations, protection of refugees. The interventionistic part of it is only one piece of the picture. Question 2, how important do you think the U.S. Supreme Court will be in reestablishing the U.S. leadership in human rights? Well, I guess that depends on who's on the Supreme Court, right? What do you think?
No, of course it's important. We have a court now that I think has at least 4 members that are sort of oblivious to it. Even the issue of foreign law, they ignore it.
even though our founding fathers thought that the international law and founding law was something that we should consider, and you find that in the constitutional debates. It's too obvious a comment to say that we've got to change the court. How that will change, I don't know. We have only 4 members of the court. We have 4 members of the court. We're young, comparatively young. We have 2 members of the court. One who is quite old, Justice Stevens, is 88. Another member of the court is not well. A third member of what I'll say the liberal side of the court would like to leave if he could. So there are appointments that are going to come, but will it change the court? I don't know. There is one thing that perhaps gives you some hope. To some extent, courts do react to the people, to what people want and to what people believe in. There is a synergy between court decisions and what the popular will is. So I think our popular will should be understood to favor the poor, the discriminate, the abused, and those that really need the help of the Supreme Court. Perhaps that will bring around those who are on the court who don't have that view now. But the United States is rather unique in the respect and the attention it gives to the Supreme Court. I think that's been well deserved over the course of history. I think it's important for any country to show me a court that's not a country which doesn't have an independent judiciary, and I'll show you abuse of power and disregard of human rights and corruption. So it's very important, not only in our court, but everywhere else. So again, I hope the opportunity will be for the kind of justices to be on the court that I can be proud of all of them.
I would add only that this reminds you of the famous joke about how many psychiatrists did it take to screw the light bulb. The light bulb has to want to change, right? The court has to want to influence human rights and see that as its mission. Why? Because when the Warren Court came in, there were a few other progressive courts. Now there are many. We see a group of people here from the South African Constitutional Court, the Canadian Supreme Court. The International Court of Justice has leading human rights figures on it. The European Court of Human Rights is developing an active jurisprudence. If the United States Supreme Court is a non-factor, human rights law will be made by other courts and other entities. And the United States has to want to influence that development, it would seem to me. And I think whether they like it or not, they will get the cases. So when the question of whether you could sue under the Alien Tort Claims Act finally comes to the U.S. Supreme Court, 6 justices did identify a basis for finding a cause of action because those cases had been litigated in lower courts for 24 years by the time he came.
Let me just add a point that's slightly off. It is very difficult to be the American judge on an international court which orders the United States to temporarily suspend the execution of a person, and only to find that the state of Texas feels free to be able to execute that person, notwithstanding the judgment of the International Court of Justice. So when we speak of re-engagement with the international community, this is the type of problem we have to face, and to recognize that if we're going to be part of the international community as far as human rights, democracy, and respect for the rule of law is concerned, we're going to have to comply with judgments of international courts and decisions of international tribunals. If we don't do that, and if we don't adjust our system to being able to do that, there is no hope.
A question, what is the proper response to those who point out there have been no terrorist incidents since 9/11 under the Bush administration. I think the proper response is Elvis has also not reappeared. I don't necessarily see the causation between those two events. I think the obvious response is to frame it that if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists, and that if you're interested in an approach to terrorism that takes account of human rights, you're somehow with the terrorists, as opposed to with the rule of law, with the American spirit. It turns out I am not with the terrorists. I just didn't see the choices that the administration made as the only ones that might actually prevent terrorist attacks. I don't think that torture has made us safer. I don't think many of these other devices have made us safer. The torture, by the way, has made it impossible to prosecute a number of these individuals because the evidence will be thrown out. And so the idea that the tactics that were adopted were the only way to achieve a result and cause the result, it's highly debatable whether they caused the result, but it's also clearly not the case that they were the only tactics which could have led to that outcome.
Marcia Rose, you have a question? I've never been in a meeting where you didn't have a question.
Senate President.
I should have said, Giuseppe Visconti came up to me earlier today and he said, that we made a mistake in that award. And I said, with some trepidation, what was the mistake? She said, we should have given it to both you and Marcia Rose.
Well, I guess I'm the presiding judge up here. Isn't that amusing? Well, anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you for a tremendous session. Thank you, Dean Coe, Dean Lawrence, Dean Rebez, Judge Buergenthal, and Mr. Shestack. And ladies and gentlemen, thank all of you for joining us today to honor these two outstanding individuals. Please join me in a final salute to our... reception across the hall in the Kelly Lounge. Thank you.